So without going into the list of all the sci-fi shows that we've had over the last 60 years, I do want to say that sci-fi doesn't need to be expensive. We have this idea that everything has to be Avatar, it has to be big budget films and shows. It really doesn't. You know, some of the greatest sci-fi shows and short films in the world in history are about ideas. You know, Coherence, Primer, Predestination, La Jetée, 1962, which was the basis for 12 Monkeys many years later.
We also just have some special guests to introduce the screening of Beacon 23. I want to introduce to you Powys Dewhurst and Brownman Ali from Planet Fantastic.
In terms of Canadian sci-fi, you know, a simple rule of thumb is if the show has Canadian content, and if it's good, then it's Canadian. That's sort of a rule that I use. In Antigua in 1986-87, you know, I was this nerdy kid, Catholic school kid, teenager, and we just moved from Barbados. We moved to Antigua. I didn't have a lot of friends at the time. And so after school, I'd go to this movie theater. And there was this owner, his name was Max Fernandez. He ended up becoming a politician later. But I would sit with him in his office as he was trying to figure out what films to pair together, right? So he would pair Platoon, because it's 1986, with The Fly, or Platoon with Aliens, which some of them I thought were odd combinations, but he knew what he was doing. The Fly in 1986 was my first introduction to Canadian sci-fi, or really Canadian anything, other than Strange Brew a few years before. You know, the name Cronenberg, because it was so many sort of letters on the screen, always stuck in my head. He had taken the 1958 film and he turned it into a sci-fi body horror show with Brundlefly. You know, it was staggering, and I remember thinking that it was about the incremental steps that were fascinating to me. He was trying to teleport just from one part of the room to the other part of the room. He wasn't trying to teleport from Earth to Mars. It was just one side of the room to the next, which made it really tangible and believable for me. When I arrived in Canada, Ray Bradbury Theatre from 1985 to 92 was a staple for me. You know, I had read the books, Bradbury short stories. I'd read A Sound of Thunder in Barbados. And a lot of the time travel stories and the sci-fi stories by Bradbury always got to me. Our Canadian actors have also been a key part of that. If you think historically, you have Jamaican-Canadian Peter Williams in 95 to 2005, 97 to 2005, he was on Stargate. Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly in 1985, Jim Carrey in The Truman Show. Ottawa's Lorne Greene, Battlestar Galactica from 78 to 79, Carrie-Anne Moss of Trinity in The Matrix, obviously William Shatner, Montreal, Star Trek, Joshua Jackson, Fringe, Leslie Nielsen, Forbidden Planet, and so on, Nathan Fillion. 2017 to 2025, The Handmaid's Tale was adapted into a feature in 1990, and of course the series, which has won 15 Emmy Awards to date. Nala Hopkinson's Brown Girl in the Ring was adapted into Sharon Lewis's Brown Girl Begins in 2017. And of course, Emily St. John's Mandel novel Station 11 about a global pandemic, we saw in 2021 to 2022, it was actually released during a global pandemic. So it was creepy as hell. You know, it was one of those things that both terrified me and I also had to tune in. Danny Goulet with Night Raiders in 2021. Dennis Goulet, sorry. I should have memorized this, but you know. Stephen Williams is also a little-known showrunner who was the showrunner of Lost and one of the producers of Lost. And he was a black filmmaker who left Toronto back in the 90s, and now he's doing stuff out there. Watchmen, he's doing a lot of great shows. He's someone I've always had my eye on over the years. And of course, you know, there are too many shows to get into, but obviously Orphan Black, Star Trek Discovery, The Expanse, Dark Matter, and the list goes on. So without going into the list of all the sci-fi shows that we've had over the last 60 years, I do want to say that sci-fi doesn't need to be expensive. We have this idea that everything has to be Avatar, it has to be big budget films and shows. It really doesn't. You know, some of the greatest sci-fi shows and short films in the world in history are about ideas. You know, Coherence, Primer, Predestination, La Jetée, 1962, which was the basis for 12 Monkeys many years later. Gattaca, many of these great films, Primer, are really Moon. Many of these great films are just about people with ideas talking in a room. And so I encourage those filmmakers who are going out there to make films to, not be confined by your budget, but more about develop the ideas and the story behind it. So I just want to introduce our colleague, Brownman Ali, who will take it from here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, boys. So I'm a jazz musician from Brooklyn, New York. So why is a jazz musician here? I was born in Trinidad, and my family immigrated to Canada when I was quite young. And like a lot of Caribbean parents, they had very strict parameters around what we got to watch. We could only watch so much Muppet Show, we could only watch so much Sesame Street, but there was one show that we could watch as much as we wanted. You want to guess what that is? Star Trek. As much Star Trek as we wanted, my brother and I got to digest. My entire family was weaned on that triadic relationship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And we delighted in their galactic adventures, boldly going where no Trinidadian boy had ever gone before. So that show painted a picture of a future filled with optimism and hope, and it became the backbone of a lot of young moral efficacy, really, in how my brother and I were raised, and I think a lot of young Canadians came up with the same sort of ideologue. There was another show that came out in 1973. I don't know how many of you have seen this. It premiered on CTV in 1973 called The Star Lost. Anyone seen that? Show of hands? Nobody. Oh, one? Okay. So, Bananas show, fantastic, very low production quality, and I went back and I rewatched a lot of those episodes now, and they don't really stand up that well. But it's an interesting premise. It was written by the great Harlan Ellison, one of the great sci-fi writers that also wrote for original series Star Trek. And it was this ark called the Earthship Ark that was out in space and had a bunch of biospheres, and it underwent an accident, and the adventures that ensued as this team of three had to go from biosphere to biosphere. But what was common between that show and Star Trek and a lot of shows of that era was hope and optimism. So a lot of sci-fi at that time embodied that ideologue, and that appealed to my family and probably a lot of yours, and why a show like that got access to our brains unfettered. So for me, what makes Canadian science fiction television great is it's really, at the end of the day, it's thematic richness, its commitment to cultural diversity, and its intellectual engagement. These shows, a lot of the shows that Powys mentioned, offer more than just escapist entertainment. They provide a platform for exploring complex social issues, ethical dilemmas, and the absurdity of the human condition, whether it's through the high adrenaline fun in Star Hunter, the exploration of identity in Orphan Black, the visual spectacle of defying gravity, the moral complexities of Continuum, the heroism and needless shirtlessness of Kevin Szabo in Andromeda, or even the sometimes painful narrative arcs of Earth Final Conflict. Canadian sci-fi television continues to captivate and challenge us all. Beacon 23 is the latest of our offerings, and I'm looking forward to having some of these mysteries set up in season 1, revealed in season 2. Enjoy.